Penn State fans, Bob Flounders, Johnny McGonigal, back Tuesday. Johnny, it's the blue-white breakdown, but more important, last week at this time, it was so cold. I did not know how I was going to make it through January and February. Today it's like 32. It might as well be 62. I feel better, refreshed, invigorated. It might be 60 by the end of the week, so everyone can get sick again, and then it'll probably, early February it'll probably be 12 again. But let's live in the moment, Johnny. Let's embrace this nice Pennsylvania weather we're having. Let's talk some Penn State football, Johnny, as we get closer to February and we get further removed from Penn State season. Things have started to settle down a little bit in terms of player movement, James Franklin's staff. I mean, there still could be some surprises. You never know with James. You just never know. But we're getting more and more into the start of the 2024 season, whether it's talking about the freshmen or it's talking about the next recruiting class. But I think it's a good time. I think Penn State fans are really we're too far away from spring. But let's talk about the future here at Penn State. They got a 2025 commitment on Sunday. They held their junior weekend, one of their junior day weekends this past weekend. So let's just start there. What were your thoughts? I know you wrote some things about some talented players that were supposed to be on campus. They did get a 3-star offensive lineman from Connecticut, I believe. But how do you think junior day went? And I know it's not the last big weekend for James Franklin and his staff.
Yeah, Bob, definitely not the last big weekend for James Franklin and the staff. A staff that has been pretty busy recently, not just hosting, kids on the weekend, but going, to Georgia, heading down to the South, heading everywhere, to not only shore up and check in on guys who have already signed in the 24 class, guys who have already committed in 2025, but obviously to bring in more prospects. And so the recruiting dead period, in they can't host prospects or anything, that gets going in the first week of February. Mm-hmm. I believe it's that Monday. It would be the 5th, if my mental calendar is working correctly right now.
I'm going to leave that one alone.
Yeah, just leave that one alone. I know I won't be preparing for the Eagles to play in the Super Bowl at that point, and same with the Cowboys, Bob. But no, so Penn State hosted dozens of prospects over this past weekend. They will this upcoming weekend and the following weekend as well. As you mentioned, they got a commitment from, I don't want to mess up his last name, but Owen.
I was going to throw it to you. I'm not sure how to pronounce it, and I don't want to offend anyone. It's a tough one.
I'll give it a go. Owen. Okay. Alicien. We'll talk to Owen at some point and get that nailed down. But yeah, like you mentioned, 3-star offensive lineman. I think notably, the first offensive lineman commit of the 2025 class, which has 8 members so far. Headlined by a couple of really good running backs, Keandre Barker from Texas and Taquai Hayes from Aliquippa. They've also got Brady O'Hara, a tight end from North Catholic, in there. So they were bound though to get. They have running back, tight end. They got a linebacker. They've got a lot of positions covered. Including a quarterback too, and Beckham Kritza. Even though they're not done recruiting the quarterback position, Bob, we'll get there in a second. But it was about time for them to get an offensive lineman in there and in the mix, and they'll obviously sign more big uglies up front. But Owen is the first of the group, so a good sign to get that ball rolling if you're Phil Troutwine, the offensive line coach, and James Franklin and his staff overall.
You had something on Penn Live about really 10 important names to know in terms of maybe a visitor list, and it's still early. Do you have a sense for maybe how Penn State is doing with some of the bigger fish that are still out there, that are on their radar, that have been on campus, that they like? There's mutual interest. Do you have a sense for maybe a couple of names for the fans to kind of just watch for as far as potential, I guess, commits in the coming weeks and months?
Yeah, I think just one big name to keep an eye on, and it's one that I've written about and a lot of people have written about and talked about for a couple of years now, because he was a standout freshman for St. Joe's Prep in Philly, is Anthony Sacca, who is a legacy with his dad, Tony, being a former Penn State quarterback. It was his first time on campus since the 2022 whiteout. I know Michigan is heavily involved there, Notre Dame, Ohio State. But Anthony is one of the best, linebacker, recruits in the country. And to get him back on campus, I think it was a really big deal for them. And all signs suggest that he enjoyed his time. And he's someone that, again, his dad played quarterback here. Like, he is familiar with Happy Valley, probably more familiar with Penn State than any other program in the country. So I think that helps Penn State quite a bit. Another name to know is Trent Wilson, a defensive lineman from Maryland, who visited 3 times this past fall, for games. He's one of the highest rated defensive linemen in the 2025 class. And it seems like Penn State is in really good position there. And then a couple of other names too, just kind of not so much flying under the radar, because I just mentioned 2 of the top prospects, especially on the defensive side of the ball. But one interesting one is Elijah Melendez, who is a linebacker from Florida in the 25 class. He's committed right now to Miami. But I saw something on Twitter where I mentioned Beckham Kritza, Penn State's 2025 quarterback commit right now, one of potentially 2. Again, we'll get there in a second. Who, Beckham is from Colorado, but spent some time, playing in Miami, and was very active on like the 7-on-7 circuits and everything. And he was tweeting, hey, like, Elijah, like, kind of come home, like, kind of recruiting the current Miami commit, maybe to flip to Penn State. So that's another name to keep an eye on, Bob.
All right. You said we're going to get there. I don't know if you want to get there now. You said we're going to get to some people in a second. I was going to turn the page and talk about some January enrollees, but if there's some other recruiting matters you'd like to discuss, by all means, have at it.
Yeah, just another name looking forward to this weekend. And it's going to be another big weekend recruiting-wise in terms of the number of prospects and the quality of recruit that they're going to have on campus. But Matt Zollers from Spring-Ford, a quarterback, is scheduled to visit this weekend. And, he just picked up an offer from Georgia, and you're thinking like, okay, like, this is a real deal kind of prospect. And he is. He wasn't, though, this time last year. He entered this past season, his junior season at Spring-Ford, with 1 FBS offer, and it was from Old Dominion. And then Pitt got involved. Matt's brother is a walk-on at Pitt, so there was kind of a connection there. Penn State got involved, and now a lot of the big players as well. Georgia being, probably the biggest one, right? Back-to-back national title in 2021, 2022, wanting this kid from Spring-Ford to come down to Athens and play for them. So he is the number 1, quarterback in the state right now. He's one of the fastest rising quarterbacks in the country. He'll be on campus again. I talked to him. This was back after Mike Yursich was fired, and I was curious, hey, is that going to throw you off or anything? Even though with Mike was heavily involved in his recruitment, he said no. Just knowing like he was comfortable with Penn State and the staff and who they would hire, and Andy Kotelnicki, who he's become more familiar with now recently, and then just the notion, or the possibility, the strong possibility, I think at this point, that 2025 will be a 2 quarterback class for Penn State. We saw it when Drew Aller came in with Bo Perbula. Jackson Smolik signs in the 23 class. Ethan Grunkmeyer, who's an early enrollee, signs in the 24 class. And so this is kind of how Penn State operates. It's like every few years they'll snag a 2 quarterback class, especially because you don't know what's going to happen with the transfer portal, with guys that are on your roster who aren't maybe playing or have that role clearly defined for them in the near future. So I think it makes sense to go after 2 quarterbacks in this class. And Zollers isn't the only one either. Like Malik Washington is one, and some there's a handful of others that they're in on. But I think Matt Zollers is one to really keep an eye on. Maybe not committing like this weekend or anything, but just one for the future.
Yeah, and I think this spring with Kotelnicki and what he's going to try and do on offense, how it might look a little different, whether it might be more dangerous. Hopefully it will be more dangerous. How he'll get their receivers up to speed, how he'll use all of his players. He did a lot of very interesting things at Kansas. Big spring, not only for the Penn State, 2024 team, but you want to kind of entice like the skill position guys and all those guys. And I just think that what Andy is going to hopefully be able to do could really help James and his staff. Not just for 2025, but also for beyond. They definitely need an offensive makeover. I'm not saying anything that everyone doesn't already know, but I just think that it's, this is James has been through quite a few coordinators as he enters his 11th year. I think it would be in his best interest and the Lions' best interest if the offense looked a lot different in terms of effectiveness, not only this year but in future years. So if Andy can coach anywhere near, I'm just thinking about his introductory press conference and how he kind of really captivating guy, right, Johnny? If he's the real deal, I think I think that James really hit a home run hiring this guy, but I think the recruits are going to be watching as well. Speaking of Kotelnicki, Penn State recruits, let's talk about some Penn State January enrollees who are going to get a chance to work with Andy in the spring. It's Tuesday. You just had something this morning on, it's a pretty big class of guys that are going to be on campus. They can't all play, but you highlighted, a handful you think that have a chance to make an impact as true freshmen. I would think it's starting to get harder and harder as Penn State continues to kind of build depth. And there's, they've lost some players. They got some good players back, but you highlighted a couple of players that really intrigue you. Why don't we get to all of them? Who on the list to you maybe is the most interesting January enrollee, and for the fan base to watch?
Yeah, definitely. You mentioned it's a big class.
Yep.
So they signed 25 guys in the 2024 recruiting class, kids out of high school. 16 of them have enrolled early. So they are on campus. They're going through classes. They've been doing that for a couple of weeks now, getting involved in the winter workouts, which is a big deal for these 17, 18, sometimes 19-year-old prospects to come in. And even if they're coming from like a powerhouse high school,
Sure.
just the difference in, and like the weight training and muscle mass building, all that kind of stuff is just a different level. And at the college level in general, but also specifically at Penn State and within the Lash building. And so I think that's a really big thing for all 16 of them to be on campus, get acclimated to college life, get acclimated to the weight room before spring ball, which is where, for a lot of veterans, position battles, start in earnest. And then through the summer and into training camp. But for these younger guys, it's their first, it's their opportunity to make a first impression. I go back to, I remember, Tony Rojas, last spring making a really good impression. You can go all the way back. There's always seemingly, a freshman or two, or sometimes even 3 or 4 that catch the coaching staff's eye and kind of gives them momentum going into the summer and into training camp. And I mentioned Ethan Grunkmeyer. Like, it's going to be tough for him. You have Drew Aller, Bo Perpula, Jackson Smolik in the quarterback room. Like, it's good for him to get in early with Andy Kotelnicki specifically as new offensive play caller, learn the playbook. But Ethan's not going to be, on the field, this coming season unless things go drastically wrong. For offensive linemen like Cooper Cousins or Egan Boyer or Garrett Sexton, like, it's tough for offensive linemen to come in and make an impact as true freshmen, especially when you have, even though you're losing, Caden Wallace and Olu Fashanu, like Hunter Norzad, it's still a room with a lot of veterans that are itching to play. The one player that I'm really looking forward to, and I outlined a few more in there, Penn Live readers, if you want to go take a look, some interesting guys on the defensive side of the ball. But as we're talking about Kotelnicki and the offense, I think Quentin Martin does have a path to early playing time. And you might look at the depth chart and the stat sheet over the last 2 seasons and say, well, Nick Singleton's back, Katron Allen is back. Like, they're the 2 workhorses, and it doesn't seem like he would have an easy path to playing time. And I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but I think Quentin Martin is a hell of a player. Number 1 player in Pennsylvania in the 2024 recruiting class. A great running back, phenomenal running back. But this is a guy that, wide receivers coach Marcus Hagans and some people in the offensive staff were thinking like, hey, he could come in as a wide receiver if he wanted to. He's going to start as a running back. But I think what Andy Kotelnicki has done in the past, and what he probably I would think plans to do at Penn State, and what made him such an attractive hire, is his creativity in putting his best skill position, players in an opportunity to succeed. And I think Quentin Martin could be one of those guys, that you get the ball out of the backfield to him. They use him in the slot, especially if the wide receiver room isn't going to make
Right.
a huge significant jump from last season, which I think we both agree they have to. Penn State wants to get done what it wants to get done. And you look at a kid like, Quentin Martin, who had over 700 receiving yards, 11 receiving touchdowns for Bell Vernon as a senior in high school. And you look at the tape, and that stuff translates. It really does. And so I think his speed, his power, his vision, all of that stuff is what you want to see. And I'm not saying he's going to go have 40 catches.
Right.
But if he's a guy, I think that, even behind Nick Singleton and behind Katron Allen in this backfield, will have an opportunity to show off those skills and be used at the very least as a gadget player for this offense, but if not more, look ahead to the 2024 season.
Johnny, for perspective, because obviously Quentin Martin is very, very talented. Just for the fans, so how would you compare him? Penn State had a couple of freshman runners in their last class in Cam Wallace and London Montgomery. It does sound like Martin is physically, I think, more developed. The production was very impressive. All the skill set, all of that. How does he compare maybe to what your thoughts were on those two guys when they signed? We haven't heard much about them. Obviously, Penn State was well set at running back. You mentioned Katron, you mentioned Nicholas, and they had Trey Potts. So it was really, there was no room at the inn unless a couple of those guys got hurt. I was just curious how you think, in your mind, is Martin just a better prospect upon arrival at Penn State, or does he have some work to do to clear those two guys?
Yeah, I mean, I think he has some work to do. I don't think he's going to be handed a role upon arrival, but I do think he comes in as a better prospect than both Cam Wallace and London Montgomery, and it's not a knock on either of those two guys at all. I liked both of their films of what they were able to do coming out, but you look at it, London Montgomery missed his senior year with a knee injury that when he arrived at Penn State, he still had to rehab and recover from that and get back. And not only just like recover from the actual injury, but get back to game speed and to what he was as a junior at Scranton Prep. And Cam Wallace was a late add in the class, kind of an under the radar 3-star guy from the South. And Jaywan Sider, speaking to him, the running backs coach last summer, said that he thought that they kind of found a diamond in the rough in Cam Wallace, but neither of those two freshmen saw the field at all this past season. And again, I don't say this as a knock on them, but I just think Quentin Martin comes in with obviously more cachet than them, but also I just think he's just a talented, just really talented player. And I think Penn State is going to see that when he hits the field. They've certainly already seen it in their years of scouting him, from Western PA. They're very familiar with him, going back to when he emerged on the scene at Bell Vernon as an underclassman. And so I think you come into this running back room. I already mentioned, and you mentioned like Nick and Katron are there. You mentioned Trey Potts though, and he's not. Trey Potts moving on, opting not to come back for another year at Penn State after transferring in from Minnesota. The Williamsport native, I thought, and I think you thought too, was kind of an invaluable member in a good way of this running back room this past season, providing leadership, but also that kind of pop and spark when Penn State needed it during the regular season. I think Quentin Martin can be that kind of guy. And again, I'm just really interested to see how Kotelnicki decides to use the running backs and use the tight ends, assuming this wide receiver room doesn't improve leaps and bounds, from a development standpoint. I mean, they might, and I don't want to shortchange those guys necessarily, but, and they're bringing in Julian Fleming, which is a really, really good add for them. But we spent the last 12 months talking about how, and even longer, about how this wide receiver room was a problem. And I think a solution to that from a passing game standpoint, from an explosive play standpoint, could be the running backs. And I think Quentin could fit into that mold.
Yeah. All right. We're talking about Penn State young players. We're talking a little Penn State recruiting on the blue-white breakdown. Johnny, I have a couple more things for you before I let you go. Just to circle back to the January enrollees, because I just wonder, I think the typical Penn State fan would see, what is it about Luke Reynolds? You wrote about him as he's the 5-star tight end that he made the cut of guys that have a chance to make an impact in some way in your mind this year. Um, Not to be contrarian, but I think the average Penn State fan is like, we've kind of seen this before. 6'4", 220-pound tight end probably can't really play tight end, or maybe he could play it as an undersized player. But what about him makes him a 5-star at that size? Because almost all of the Penn State tight ends that they've had, and they've had great success, I think, during James's time with tight ends. But not all of them have been like physically ready like Pat Fryermuth was in 2018. Like you could see, hey, this is a true freshman that doesn't look like a true freshman, and there's a good reason he's on the field. A lot of these guys just need to get bigger and stronger. When you look at Luke, is there going to have to be a significant physical transformation, maybe get up to 235 or 240, or is his skill set and how Penn State might use him, can he play and make an impact at 225? I know they have Tyler Warren. I know they have Khalil Dinkins. I know they have Rappelier. I know they have Joey Schlafer. I hope I said that right. Schlaffer, the local kid. But I'm just wondering, what is it about him at potentially a bit undersized that maybe you have him on your radar? I know he's a 5-star.
Yeah, I mean, the 5-star, it's one of those where sometimes you look back years on and you look at, how was that kid a 3-star?
Right.
How was that kid a 5-star? Reynolds coming from, the New England area, the competition that he was playing against, it wasn't the stiffest. And it's not like he was playing in Florida or Georgia or something like that. So, but he did dominate, and it's hard to look at film and say, okay, is he dominated just because of competition? Or and again, I'm not saying that like it was fair competition necessarily, but I do think that he just kind of he's a natural, and I think at 220 he could play there. I think he'll add weight, like you mentioned, maybe 235, 240, and he has the frame to support that. I just think another part of it, and this is away from the film side of it and away from like the talent side of it, he was a former quarterback, and he only made the switch to tight end a couple of years ago, when their quarterback up there in Connecticut was actually Dante Reno, who was a Navy commit, I believe, or no, they brought in, they had a Navy commit at quarterback who beat out Reynolds. Then they brought in another kid at quarterback who was a South Carolina commit. Anyway, so he makes the switch to tight end. And so he understands how to process offense. He understands like the behind the scenes stuff that go into it. And that's not saying he's going to come in and just like absorb the playbook like easily necessarily, but I think that helps. And when it comes to developing a young player like that, to have that experience in the past, I do think he's a bit of a project in that, he just started playing tight end a couple years ago. And he definitely needs to add some weight. And you look at the tight end room, and Tyler Warren is firmly established. They're probably their top target coming back, for this upcoming season. Khalil Dinkins, I liked what he did whenever he got on the field as the number 3 tight end last year. And Rappelier redshirted, and I've said before how much I think he has a bright future at Penn State. So again, in terms of clear path of playing time, I think Luke Reynolds has it's not even as good as what Quentin Martin could have in terms of arriving and playing right away. Just kind of banking on the talent and banking on what he's already done and kind of what his mental makeup is. And Penn State got in on him early when he was a 3-star, and he kind of blew up from there. And I think he has a bright future, and he's one of those guys that in spring ball we could hear about performing well. That doesn't necessarily guarantee playing time or a starring role or anything, but it's also kind of easy. Just I don't want to just say like, oh, he's the 5-star, he's going to play. Sure. But at the same time, he's a 5-star for a reason.
Yep. Just to clean that up, sorry, it's Joey Schlaffer, Exeter Township. I apologize to anyone. I just couldn't remember if there was an L in his name. It's Joey Schlaffer. I know they think highly of him as well. Tyler Warren, high school quarterback, made the conversion to tight end, so that's a nice precedent. And also, if I'm Luke, maybe I'm gonna spend a little time this winter with Tony Rojas and get on the Tony Rojas eating plan. That transfer, I still can't. When James Franklin said he gained like 23 pounds or whatever it was,
29. 29.
Yeah, in like less than I think 6 weeks. I didn't believe him, but all of it was pretty much true. I mean, when you looked at him in the spring game and you looked at him in the fall, he looked like a college linebacker, and I think he was a lot closer probably to 200 pounds or close to it when he got to Penn State. But yeah, so anything is possible. I think maybe Luke might want to just ask him like how he did it, but he does probably need to get bigger. And like 5 stars. They are 5 stars for a reason. We'll see how that goes. Johnny, before I let you go here on the Blue White Breakdown, I don't imagine we're going to talk again until after conference championship game Sunday. You're a pretty good prognosticator. You nailed the college playoff. Having spent some time around you these past couple of seasons, I know you're not afraid to have an opinion, whether it's on a college football game or an NFL game. Do you have a strong opinion on either one of the conference championships? Maybe from a gambling perspective, and even if the fans aren't that interested, I am interested because I, like you, like to have a little fun on Sundays as well.
Yeah, absolutely. No, look, in terms of like my rooting interest, for me, it's anyone but the 49ers. Just with how with the Eagles beating them in the conference championship game last year, and then just the constant complaining from that franchise for weeks on end, using Super Bowl week to just complain about Brock Purdy getting hurt. Like, don't put a backup tight end on Hassan Reddick, and you don't have that issue.
Yeah.
So really, from a rooting standpoint, it's anyone but San Francisco. So maybe that clouds my judgment a little bit.
Bet with your head, Johnny. You got to bet with your head.
I will be pulling for the Lions.
I think everyone is.
So, but I do like the Ravens to get it done at home. You might disagree. It's one of those where it's hard to bet against Mahomes. I did not bet against Mahomes in Buffalo, and that was nice. But I just like what the Ravens have done this year. From an offensive standpoint, I think Roquan Smith is going to have a big game, and you look at what has kind of carried the Chiefs so far. Obviously, everything goes to Mahomes, but like Pacheco has been running angry. Every time he gets the ball, he looks like a bull in the china shop.
Yeah.
And I think Roquan Smith is going to have something to say about that this Sunday. And I think the Ravens' run defense and a little Lamar magic will get it done. So I think I'll be taking the Ravens. I believe they're 2.5 point favorites, 3 point favorites.
Yeah, that sounds about right. If it stays under 3, I think there's going to be a lot of money on the Ravens. I'll be curious if it gets to 3 or even a little bit more than that. 3 is a big number. 3.5 is an even bigger number. But yeah, just watching what the Ravens did to the Texans, and I didn't even think they played that well. I thought that was a pretty good Texans team. They kind of just walked through in the second half of that game.
Yeah, I like Baltimore. My head says it's going to be Baltimore, San Francisco, which I think was obviously both of those teams being the 1 seeds, and that's not going out on a limb. And I guess looking back on it, Bob, I didn't really go out on a limb by saying Michigan was going to win the national title because they were the favorite. It just felt like a lot of people were on Bama and Texas.
Oh, yeah, I know I was. Yeah.
So I don't think it's going out on a limb to say it's probably going to be the Ravens and the Niners. And please God, do not let the Niners win the Super Bowl.
2 Penn State NFL thoughts based upon what I saw this past weekend and this weekend. I'll tell you what, I always liked him at Penn State. He did not have a good finish to his season. Rasheed Walker is good. They got him at that left tackle. He did a number on Nick Bosa. 7th round pick. They redshirted him last year. He clearly wasn't healthy, but what a find. And I always thought, I saw him when he was young at Penn State. You could see the ability. He did not finish up, I thought, great at Penn State, but he's good. And that's a young team. Audrey Snyder's got to be pretty happy just about the Packers in general. But I was really impressed with him. And in the Chiefs Ravens game, I think at some point you're going to see Odafe Owe and Donovan Smith collide. It might not be on every play, but that is old versus new, a young, talented outside linebacker edge guy going against Donovan Smith, who played on James Franklin's first team. I think he was a second-round pick in the 2015 draft. He's made a ton of money, won a Super Bowl with Tampa, got paid by the Chiefs. He's playing better down the stretch. I thought he's a key to the game against the Ravens. They have a lot of athletes in all over that front seven and in the secondary. But I will be noticing to see if Owe and Smith have a say in this outcome, and if they kind of go against each other. I can't bet against the Ravens based on what I saw. I'm rooting for the Lions, and I'm starting to wonder more and more if teams have started to figure out Brock Purdy a little bit, number one. And if Deebo Samuel doesn't play, that's a big deal because of the way they use him. If he doesn't play, I think the Lions do have the horses to take that to the limit. I'm not sure about Jared Goff on the road, but that team plays hard. And they are physical along both lines of scrimmage. So I think the NFC game is going to be really, really good. And it might even be better than the AFC game because I do think the Ravens might just have too much just about in all phases.
One thing I will be hitting is Christian McCaffrey rushing receiving props. Like that has been a boon for anyone who has been hitting that this year.
Yeah.
Or anyone who haven't had him on their fantasy team probably won the title.
League winner.
One more note on these games, Bob.
Yep.
If you're just a Penn State fan, you don't care who wins. Guess what? You're going to have a former Penn State player win the Super Bowl because you mentioned Owe on the Ravens. They also have Jordan Stout, the punter, Dan Chisena, the former walk-on at Penn State.
Yeah.
Got elevated as a wide receiver for the Ravens ahead of the game against the Texans. On the Chiefs side of the ball, you mentioned Donovan Smith.
Mm-hmm.
On the NFC side, you got Jason Kabinda with the Lions, who is a fullback there now and actually caught a pass over the past weekend. It was a little check down, kind of a hurry deal by Jared Goff, but he's with the Lions. And then, Kevin Givens and Jair Brown on the 49ers. So regardless of what happens, a former Penn State player is going to win the Super Bowl. And Penn State fans with no allegiances whatsoever can just wear their Rob Lowe NFL hat with a little Penn State emblem on the side and be happy.
Yeah, Jair, hopefully he'll play this week. He was healthy, but they kind of went with experience. The experience didn't really pay off. Logan Ryan didn't play well. Hopefully Jair will get some run this week. I think he's a guy that the moment's not too big for, and I wouldn't be surprised if he plays. He makes an impact in that game. All right, Johnny, I'll let you go. I know you got some stuff to get to this week. Hopefully we'll talk next week, and we'll both be right about our NFL picks, and then we'll be a lot wealthier. Maybe not a lot wealthier. A bit wealthier than we are right now.
Modestly. Yeah. Go Lions.